Okay, hello and welcome to another Hempsel's Vodcast, actually the sixth and last vodcast of the Business Map series. My name's James Hempsel and I'm joined today by my colleague Donna Sheldon, who and both of us were involved in the delivery of the Business Map webinars way back in January 2021. The Business Map has been part of a project funded by the Department for Education, which ran from November 2020 to March 2021. And if you've seen any of the webinar recordings or the podcasts, you'll know that already. But we've been busy over the past 4 months developing the Business Map and launching it, and we were thrilled and amazed actually by the response from providers and local authority colleagues when we launched the Business Map at 3 different provider and local authority webinars in January. The response really fantastic and clearly has connected with lots of providers thinking around how they plan their businesses and respond to the changes in the childcare market that have happened so recently, but also to think again about how we all approach the business of managing businesses. All of the Business Map resources are stored and saved on the Foundation Years website. So Google Foundation Years Business Map, and you should be able to find the recording of the webinars, the 6 vodcasts, and other slides and resources as well. So today, with this final discussion, Donna and I wanted to reflect on that 4 months. It's been a busy period, and gosh, what a different period of time it's been for all of us. To think about the reaction to the work that we've done, put it into context in a 2020-2021 context, so what's been happening recently, and look at some of the common things that you've been telling us you've done as a result of attending the Business Map webinars or using the tool and putting it into practice, or even bits of the tool. You know, we don't have to do the whole thing. It should be something that we look at individually and think what works for our own settings. So this slide acknowledges the reaction to the webinar has been really great, and thank you to the hundreds of you who attended the webinars and have accessed the resource and watched the recordings of the webinars since. What stuck out for us was that there were some takeaway actions. Lots of you were saying, actually, as a result of today, I'm going to connect better with my local early years team. I'm going to use the local childcare sufficiency assessment more and in different ways, and of course use the Business Map. Now, Donna, you were involved in the delivery of the first provider Business Map webinar, and the response to your approach and your content was really good. People really warmed to your approach and your thinking. So what have been your reflections as being part of this project that we've been running for the past 3 or 4 months? What do you think are the whys and the hows that people really do need to be taking away from it?
I think in terms of the Business Map, the whys in this is, I think, very much understood as to in terms of why are we doing this. I think the how is the difficulty. It's the time element of it. It's taking that time to be able to use those resources and to be able to use them on a regular basis to really inform how the business is going forward. And again, you know, particularly in a time like we've just experienced in the past year, it's even more crucial. And I think so. I think if I was to sum it up, it's the why bit is very, very clear to providers. They understand why they need to do it. And the knowing how to do it. I think they gained a lot from the Business Map and from those tools that was given to them. I think the bit about how that they will need to work on going forward is how do they find the time to do it. And I think that will be individual for each different setting. And as with any strategies, any tools that we put in place, it's always the case of you'll get out of it what you put into it. So it's just finding that time, I think, that will be the issue that some providers need to look at and reevaluate.
And I know that comes up later because people ask lots of questions around how can I make the time? And I think, you know, I've run a business for 21 years, and I know that there are favourite things that you like to do when you're doing your work. When anybody's doing their work, we do our work to do the bits that we like to do and make the difference that we want to achieve, the work with children and families or clients or customers or colleagues. And sometimes, you know, we must acknowledge that some bits of the business of managing a business aren't as attractive or fun as others, and especially when things are difficult.
Yeah.
We've all had a difficult business year this year. That can motivate you to look at your business management in different ways. Of course it can. It also can be lots of fear and dread. But I know that the most common response to when people know that there's something they need to do, once they've looked at it and taken action around it, it feels a lot better. What do you think to that?
I think that's absolutely true. And again, I think it's the getting started with it. It's breaking the different sections of that business map down into smaller bits that you can maybe, you know, spread out. Because I think in terms of the experience you was talking about there, that we all have bits of our jobs that we love and bits of our jobs that we'd least like to do. I think, you know, one of the very common themes of early years is that, you know, often managers have moved up from being practitioners. So actually they came into the sector because they love working with children. And so absolutely the paperwork side of it, the business side of it is quite often something that it's not the enjoyable part of the job. But I think on top of that, what's been so important about the business map is that it's not usually the area that they get a great deal of training in either. You know, they will have had a lot of training in early years and they'll be experts in early years, but the business side of it is very different. And so I think the business map is those tools and those strategies that they need to be able to drive that side of the business, but it isn't the most enjoyable size. So I think it's about being able to break that down into the smaller components, maybe do a SWOT analysis one day, maybe look at your occupancy at another time, and so not to feel overwhelmed with it all, to break it down into small parts and to do it at the times of day where they feel more productive. Because if they find a time of day where they feel more productive, it will take less motivation to do it because they're already quite motivated at that time. So that would be my advice to any providers, is to look at breaking it down into small, tiny sections of it that you could that feel manageable and not overwhelming, and to pick the time of day that you feel most energized and do little parts of it at that time of the day.
Do you know, I would agree with that, because I know that I'm much better in the morning and getting lots of things done, and that's where the energy is. If you want to catch my attention and distract me, do that in the afternoon. So I know it can be very satisfying to me to think that the things I've had to do, that I needed to do, have been done in the morning, because I can tick them off my list. But so why, you know, in a nutshell, why should a setting in early years and childcare connect better with their local early years team, do you think?
I think what came out of the webinars is certainly the childcare sufficiency assessment, that you know, the local authority are holding all that information. It's vital information to how the each individual early years settings, you know, kind of drives their provision forward. And I think the support that's available there, the resources that are available there. So I think sometimes, you know, we can go off and we can start reinventing the wheel when actually those resources may well be available. And, you know, it's just asking the question. Quite often, if we go back to local authority early years teams and ask the question, do you have this? Do you know how I can do this? they'll probably have something in place that they use with other providers. And if they don't, they'll probably go out and find it, and they'll, you know, send that over to that provider. So I think for me, it's the information that they hold. You know, they've got all that local information about what's going on, and also what we're predicting might be happening the following year. So without that sort of information, the business plan is going to have huge sections of it missing. So I think for me, it's the information that they hold and the support that they can offer as well.
Yeah. And you know, early years teams aren't as big as they used to be, but they certainly retain their statutory duties to do those sorts of functions. And of course, the more providers input and share and get involved in the collection of data for things like the assessments, the better information there will be and more useful it is for everybody in the sector. That's I couldn't have put it better myself. Thanks, Donna. Next slide acknowledges that the year that we've just been through, we've all had really, we've had real experiences, haven't we, in terms of seeing our businesses change and be put under all sorts of different challenges. I think, though, the experiences that we've all had have been well documented and well discussed, but I wonder what you think will happen, is likely to happen next, and what about future trends in the sector that people need to be factoring into their business planning?
So I think I always try and look at the positives, and I think whatever's happened, it's happened, it's been, it's gone. There's a lot of positives that can come out of this. So I think in terms of things like the technology that's been used to do things like show rounds, to be able to show parents around that setting, I can see massive benefits in that, in terms of things like safeguarding. You're not inviting strangers into the setting, which has always happened historically, is we've invited strangers into the setting to look around. I think, things like connecting with children in the home environment. So, where we might have 2-year-olds where the parents are anxious about children joining an early years setting, which we have seen a lot of those anxieties over the past year. To allow that child to access something like story time while the other children are enjoying it in the setting, just gives the parent and the child that little bit of an insight into actually this is what happens there. And I think, if the child does then join that setting, the child will be familiar with some of the environment, some of the faces even of the staff members who've read those stories. But also what we've found from that is it's been brilliant for role modelling to parents. This is how you do a painting activity. This is how you tell a story and draw your child into it. So I'd hope to see more of that in the future, a little bit more of opportunities where children who haven't accessed childcare because of anxieties around it, or because of illness maybe, can still tap into some of that experience using the technology. I think in terms of some of the issues that have arisen in 2021, 2020 and 2021 around the occupancy levels, I think we will start to see that return to normal. I think, you can understand certainly over the winter months why a parent who hasn't got a child in school might not see it necessary to get up and take a younger child into nursery. So I think now that schools are back, I think we will start to see that uptake again on those places. I think one of the possible trends could be around having, for the local authorities in particular, having to look around at what they've got in more rural areas. Because I think, one of the things that we've seen from businesses is that the working from home has worked for a lot of organisations. And I think there are a lot of organisations that are saying, we will continue to allow staff to work from home part of the time. And so I think what that may do is push some of those people who lived in city centres or close to city centres for work purposes out towards the rural areas where we actually have very little childcare. So it could be that there's opportunities there for settings to be looking at sort of the more rural areas and what's available there, because I think we might see that, in terms of the housing market, that actually people are starting to move further afield just because they don't have to commute every single day into work. So I think it is the key to this, again, is using that business map to look at what is going to happen, or what do we predict could happen over the next 12 months, over the next 24 months, coming out of the back of COVID. And for that, it will be about just looking at what's going on in the media, looking at anything that affects people's employment, affects the occupancy in the setting. So it's just going to be looking at these trends now, I think, over the next 12, 24 months and predicting where you can drive that business forward to be able to make the gains from it.
I think you're right. And I've used the word trends there very deliberately because predicting the future is very difficult. But being able to notice a trend and how things have changed in response to things that have happened in the past is a very good way to use to model what might happen next. And yes, we've seen a gradual increase of take up of 3 and 4 year old places. I think that's been encouraging to see. Obviously, this term in spring 21 has been very challenging in terms of lockdown. But we have seen a reduction in take-up of 2 year olds, it seems, and we've seen a flatlining of lots of paid for childcare demand, particularly in out of school and wraparound. So we can see some grounds for optimism. And whilst you say you can see things returning to normal, I think we can see a return to need and demand for early years and childcare, all types. But I think that the ways in which people want it will remain quite different, I think, for some time to come. So there is always this instinct for us to return back to normal. But I think realistically, people do need to be thinking about a 1 to 2 year plan around getting to any sense of what things used to be. And you're right, the location of that and the patterns of use will be very, very different, because people, the amount of stuff that's happening online is remarkably different to how it was 12 months ago. Okay, so let's look at this final slide, Business Matters, it's entitled. And really, these were the themes that came out of what people have been saying to us since the webinar, the questions, the comments, the chat, of which there was a lot around. And the first one, making time for business management, is something that we've touched on in our earlier discussion. I've talked about the importance for me around organising my day and getting things over in the morning. You've talked about taking things in bite-sized pieces so it doesn't feel like an overwhelming thing to do. I think for me, good advice is to dedicate 15, 20, 30 minutes a day to the things that need doing, that such as business planning, and an awful lot in a week can be done if you're able to identify that time. And only yesterday I was talking with a colleague who was dreading a piece of work and had been putting it off and putting it off. And in the end, when they opened this piece of work, this email that needed doing, they said, yeah, and it took me 10 minutes. What was I worried about? So sometimes the feeling and the thought about having to do these things can feel more overwhelming than the actual task itself. But also I know when I've been looking at how I've been managing my business this year, that actually if I put that time and effort in, I feel an awful lot better at the end of it, having invested that time, and things invariably have not felt as bad as they did at the beginning, or at least I've got a route map, I've got a way out of it, or I've got a plan, I know what needs to be done. Now, another comment that we had was, how often do I need to update my cash flow? There are lots of people on the session who don't have a cash flow, but so there's lots of commitment to do one. But how often should a cash flow be updated? And I'll ask you for your view, and then I'll give you mine.
I would say every month it should be updated. It's a monthly tracking system. And so, yeah, it should be updated every month, and doing it every month will help somebody to have that control and to make those adjustments if things are changing. I do think, though, for some providers, maybe childminders, where there isn't a great deal of change, and where actually, because they're the ones delivering the service, they can kind of, I think they have more intuition around it. Maybe every 3 months, but certainly no longer than every 3 months. If we leave it any longer than that and something has changed dramatically, then it's likely that we're not going to pick up on it quickly enough to be able to resolve that. So I would say every month for most group settings, maybe every 3 months for a childminder who's just got a little bit more intuition around it, a little bit more working knowledge around what's going on.
Okay, I mean, my response really is that, you know, I will admit it. In 21 years of business, I've not always maintained a cash flow, and that's because sometimes I've not needed to. In that, cash flow has not been a problem. It's not been something that I've needed to tightly manage. There's been enough work. The money's come in time, but it's the time to do a cash flow is when things have changed, are more unpredictable, and need finely and tightly managing. So it will give nobody any surprise or shock to hear this year I've run a cash flow that I've had to look at every 1 to 2 weeks, certainly a minimum of each month. The principle of plotting what will come in predicted each month and then going back and checking against reality and inputting actuals is really really vitally important. So yeah, at least monthly, I think, but less frequently or more frequently according to the needs of your businesses sometimes. There's also some stuff there around tackling sustainability. I like to talk to people about business plans and sustainability plans. I think we're all concerned about sustainability, and I think Business Map does a really good job of supporting everybody to think about how sustainable their business is, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I think a lot of what we've talked about already is key to sustainability, isn't it? It's the cash flow forecast that's going to ultimately give us that sort of the view of what the sustainability is. How, you know, the occupancy is going to give us a view of that, and ultimately to kind of be able to predict the occupancy. We've talked already about the getting in touch with local authority and things like the childcare sufficiency assessments, which gives us things like birth date rata. And so it's having that information to hand. But I think the other thing about business sustainability that sometimes gets overlooked is actually we you know, if we do our marketing, if we do our promotion right, which again, all those tools are in the business map, it is something that sustainability isn't then completely out of our control. We have got more control over it if we've looked at our cash flow, looked at how our occupancy affects the cash flow, and have put things in place to reduce the expenditure if our occupancy isn't as high as we might like. And then we've got all that information from the childcare sufficiency assessment, which talks to us about, you know, what are the birth rates and where are all the children, where are our funded 2-year-olds, 3 and 4-year-olds as well. So it's using all that information and then using that to be able to plan your marketing, your promotional activities around it, which will give somebody more control over that sustainability.
And that's really how the aim of the business map, isn't it? And how the business map aims to help people go through that process. There's an awful lot of plates to spin, but if we spin one at a time and build ourselves up, then we're in a much better position, I think. So my priorities for 2021 are, as somebody running a business in early years and childcare, are to keep talking to customers, to clients, to partners, to providers around what's happening, local authorities, what are they noticing, what are the trends, what are the emerging ideas, what's happening, so that we're all very well informed and connected. I think, you know, this year we've forged some hugely strong connections with everybody across the country, and I think online does enable us to connect in deep and meaningful ways, and very frequent ways as well, and to retain a strong focus on business management at all times. A little and often, I think, is the mantra for me this year, and to respond to what's changed, you know, and still be prepared to change. Focus on change rather than thinking about wanting to recoil to what used to be. So it's about what's right for the future rather than thinking about getting back to how things used to be in the past. Have you set your priorities for the year?
Yeah, I think it's similar to yourself. I think the networks that I've built up over the last year, and I think there's nothing like a crisis actually to pull people together, is there? And to kind of huddle together and say, let's protect each other. And I think we saw a lot of that. And I would certainly like to continue that. I think, you know, as somebody who works alone, just like childminders, that those networks have been absolutely crucial to not only the business side of what I do, but actually, you know, the kind of functioning well and feeling part of something else as well. So that's certainly something that I want to continue, is that networking and that building really strong relationships over the next year.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's what connects us all. We're all running businesses. We're all working in early years and childcare. We've all been through years of experience of running businesses, but we've also all experienced the year that we've just had. So that does bring us together with a shared experience and hopefully shared approaches and solutions to what happens next. Okay, thanks, Donna. That concludes the final vodcast for the Business Map series and signs off for this 4-month project funded by the department. I would like to thank them for working with us over the past 4 months. It's been a very rewarding and busy 4 months, and we really hope that everybody has found it as useful as everybody's said, but also continue to access the resources that are stored on the Foundation Years website to use whenever you find those 20 minutes every day and you need some tools to help along the way. Thanks very much, Donna, and thanks everybody for listening, and goodbye.